Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to talk about how to be the world's best law student, but once again, my title didn't start out with the final title. My original title was How Not to Be Elena Kagan. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what's wrong with Elena Kagan? Now, as a member of the Supreme Court Bar, I know enough not to throw a little shade at my second favorite justice behind the notorious RBG. She's my favorite justice, of course, because she's shorter than I am. Elena Kagan is my second favorite because she's only two inches taller than I am. And so when I start to think about Elena Kagan, I see that we've kind of lived parallel lives. Well, with a couple of exceptions, of course. I never got a degree from Princeton University summa cum laude, and I certainly didn't have a master's from Oxford when I started law school, but we both had the same nickname, Shorty. I mean, of course, hers was given to her by Thurgood Marshall, whereas mine was given to me by my big brother. And we also B-bombed our first year at Harvard Law. Now, when I found out that she B-bombed at Harvard Law, I was so relieved because if Elena Kagan could B-bomb law school, then any of us can. And as I became a professor and I started to see that somewhere between 80 to 90% of students don't get straight A's their first year of law school, I started to realize that maybe what Pam Carlin told me when she was my civil procedure professor and was giving me feedback on my B-bombing, that maybe it's okay to be average among the very best. Thanks, Professor Carlin. Nothing like rubbing salt in the wound by calling us average. But if Elena Kagan is average, then maybe it's okay. But Elena Kagan didn't settle for B-bombing. What she did was she took it up a notch. And she decided that she was going to overcome what I call the Kagan effect. Now, you could call it the B effect, but of course, people could say that's the Binford effect, and I certainly don't want to go down in legal education history as an example of average, so we'll call it the Kagan effect. And as you can see, she really did get both a B and a B minus her first year of law school, and most of you as law students will too. Now, this is really hard for your ego, I know, because the whole reason you came to law school is because you are so smart. And you have worked so hard your whole life that you've gotten A's, you're really argumentative, that people have been telling you since you were 7 years old that you should go to law school. You would make a perfect lawyer because that's where smart, argumentative people are supposed to go, right? And then all of a sudden, you go from being this high-achieving, argumentative, confident person to realizing that you are average among the very best. And most of you don't want to be average among the very best, so let me give you 7 clues about how you can go from being average among the best to actually trying to be the best law school student. The first one is to get rid of this. Just get rid of it. I hate those things. I've always wanted to do that. All the professors at home, they're clapping right now. They're like, where do I get a laptop that I can throw across the room, right? Because what do we know about laptops in the classroom? That 90% of you students go online at least once during class if you have a device with you. And that's distracting. And we also know that 60% of you are distracted for half the class. Now, how well do you think you're learning when you're distracted? And oh, it gets worse because most of the time that students use unrelated applications in class 40% of class time. So you're not paying attention in class when you bring devices. On top of that, studies have shown that your reading comprehension goes down with devices when you're reading digitally if you're using really long or really complicated text. We know what law school text looks like. It is long, it's complicated, it's dry. That's exactly the sort of text that you should not be reading online or in a digital format. You want to read People magazine on your computer? Go ahead. That's the kind of stuff that won't have an impact on your comprehension or your retention when you read it digitally. But don't read People magazine in class because that's just going to make us want to throw your computer across the room. The other reason why you should leave your computer at home is because that's not the best way to take notes. I know that I'm going to reveal myself as a child of the 20th century when I say bring a pen and a notebook to class. But the studies that have been conducted on taking notes show that people who keyboard their notes have lower levels of comprehension and lower levels of retention than people who handwrite their notes. Why? We don't really know, but what we think is that when you handwrite your notes, that engages your mind in a way that doesn't, that you have to actually think about what the person is saying. When you keyboard, you tend to take down what someone's saying verbatim, whereas when you write it, you actually have to process the information, make it shorter, outline it, try and put it into your own words so that you're more likely to read it or remember it. And it was interesting because last year I was doing an exit interview with one of my students and we were going through his class notes. They were in Korean. So like you really want to up your game and be the world's best law student, then don't just take your notes by hand, take your notes by hand in Korean. And for the record, this student was not Korean. But it helped him. Now here's something that I do really, really well. If you want to be the world's best law student, you need to fail, and you need to fail a lot. Why? Because we know that failure primes your mind for learning. The reason why is because, believe it or not just law students, but most people tend to have an inflated sense of self. Hard to believe, right? And there's nothing that's going to bring your ego down more than bee-bombing or failing or learning what your inadequacies are. If you look at Elena Kagan's transcript that I showed you at the beginning of this talk, she recovered from her bee-bomb and went on to get almost straight A's in law school and was, hired as a Supreme Court law clerk, etc. But for each of us, we need to not be afraid to fail. We actually need to embrace it as a way to learn. But I'm not talking about failing in the kind of way that Elena Kagan did or that I did by getting B's on high-stakes exam at the end of the course. I'm talking about failing from the beginning. How much courage does that take to say, I'm going to go to law school, I'm going to fail from the beginning? There was a study at UCLA that showed that if people took a test, a low-stakes test, right at the beginning of the course, it improved their grade by an entire letter grade because they start to realize where the gaps are in their knowledge and they work hard to fill in those gaps. And so what you want to do is start testing yourself. There was a study that was done on 10 of the most common learning methods. They looked at over 700 studies, and what they found is that of only 2 high-utility learning methods, testing in a low-risk setting is a high-utility method, that this is one of the best ways to learn, to test yourself, not in a way that makes you anxious, but in a way that helps you to focus on what you know and what you don't know. And when you test yourself, make sure that you do it across time, because the other thing that this study showed is that another high-utility learning method is to actually spread out your learning across time. So don't just use flashcards or give yourself tests or ask your professor, even better, to give you tests. And don't tell them that it's too much work, because we do live in the 21st century and your law professors know, or they should know, that it's very simple to set up weekly quizzes online for your students to test themselves, and that it doesn't need to be a significant part of their grade, but you should require them to do it because it will help them to learn. The other thing is, another thing that I do really well, get confused. I'm not talking about the level of confusion where you just want to shut down. I'm talking about the level of moderate confusion where, just like taking your notes in hand, where your mind is engaged. That we know now that if you have a moderate level of confusion, you're going to be more focused and you're going to be more mentally engaged in the content that you're trying to acquire. And so you're going to have a higher level of understanding and a higher level of retention if you're moderately confused with an intellectual task. On top of that, this is the part that makes me crazy. I love reading. I probably own, in our house, several thousand books. There are few things in life that I enjoy more than reading. So go ahead and read, and maybe even read again once, but don't you dare read after that second time, because studies show that after the second reading, your gains actually go down, that you start to lose your acquisition and understanding of that knowledge. And so what we're seeing is an entire generation of students who will read don't really remember it that well, reread, remember it a little bit better, and then they read it again just before the exam, and they're just like, I don't understand it at all now. That's because that third reading is where you start to lose your gains. Now, where can you gain? One, find opportunities to teach. Teaching a subject helps you to understand a subject. Now, I know that you're teaching, I'm in teaching, because I'm trying to serve others, just like all you law professors are out there trying to teach because you want to serve others. But you know what? We, the teachers, learn. And so you, the students, you need to find ways to teach too. Now, you can do it in a way that you're helping others by tutoring or by doing street law programs, but know that there are benefits for you in this. And so even in study groups, or if you decide to be a TA in one of your classes, you're going to learn the material better than you would if you were to read and maybe even test. So think about ways that you can find opportunities to teach in law school. The other method that you should be exploring is doing. Actually applying your knowledge is a way to better understand it, to better retain it. And so those clinics, those externships, the simulated courses, doctrinal courses that are embedded with practice experiences or applications, these are ways to help increase your learning in law school. So you need to actively be seeking out a curriculum for yourself where you're finding opportunities to teach, finding opportunities to do, and where you're being tested on a regular basis. Now, this one, I know you're going to resist because you're thinking, I don't even like my professors at school. I certainly don't want to adopt one and bring one home. But I assure you, adopting a professor is not just a charitable act. It will help you too. And you don't even have to feed us. You can adopt us right on campus. So what does it mean to adopt a professor? It means that you're going to find someone on campus with whom you resonate. You might resonate with them intellectually or professionally. This may be someone that you see as a potential role model, someone who's very established or successful in your area, and you're going to develop a relationship with him or her. Why? Well, not only because, we're so cuddly and lovable, but because it's going to help you in the long run. Now, we know from the research that's been done that students who adopt a professor, students who develop a relationship with a professor who cares about them, they're much more engaged in work after they graduate, and they also have higher levels of wellness in all areas of their life. And so it's not just good for us, it's good for you too. Remember, think about the letter of recommendation that was written by one of Elena Kagan's professors when she first was graduating from law school and she wanted to clerk with the US Supreme Court, that they talked about the fact that her B's in her first year of law school were not indicative of her potential. And I really think that a lot of the time, it's professors who make a difference in your launch as you're graduating, and you should value those relationships. The last thing, this one's going to come easy to you. Well, it might in theory, but it's harder in practice, which is to live a little. That there is so much research that shows that you have to take care of yourself in law school. Now, I've read the research. I know the studies that show that when you start law school, you're no more crazier than the rest of us. You have about the same rates of mental illness, about the same rates of divorce, and then all of a sudden, after your first year of law school, it increases significantly. So it's well above the numbers in the general population. It then plateaus throughout law school, and then after law school, it comes down a little bit, but it never goes back to normal levels. So basically, we are going to do our best to make you crazy, and you have to make sure that we are not successful in doing that, because it's certainly not intentional, and it's not good for you. So what are the things that you need to do? One, you need to sleep every single night. I see students all the time who say, I pulled an all-nighter last night, or I only got 3 hours of sleep. That makes you hallucinate. It affects your memory. It affects your comprehension. And lack of sleep makes you crazy. So stop thinking that you're a successful law student, that you're a manly man, that you're a tough girl. If you don't sleep, sleep every night. Take care of yourselves. In addition to that, exercise regularly. Law school is very stressful, and you need to do everything you can to reduce those stress levels, and one of the best ways to do that in addition to sleeping is to exercise regularly. every week, you need to carve out 3 to 4 times a week when you're getting exercise. I don't care if it's walking, I don't care if it's going to the gym, but this is going to increase both your intellectual strength as well as your mental strength. And on top of that, even if you end up bombing all of law school, at least you'll be a hard body, right? And who wouldn't love that? In addition to that, we know that foods impact how well the mind works, that there are healthy foods that make you smarter, that help you to perform better intellectually. So if I see you walking around with a quart of Mountain Dew or a quart of Coke, don't be surprised if I take it away from you, because that's going to put you on a caffeine and sugar cycle that's going to impact your performance as a law school student. So eat healthy, sleep, and get some exercise. In addition to that, limit that caffeine and sugar, but also limit that alcohol, because that also will feed into that depression and alcoholism. We see an increase in alcoholism among law school students. So don't become a statistic. And lastly, surround yourself with love, and not just the professor that you adopted. Develop healthy friendships. Find opportunities for collaboration. Spend time with your family, friends, whoever it is you love, and make sure that there was a recent study that came out in Scientific American last week, and it talked about how one hug a day can impact health overall. So these are some of the ideas that you can pursue in order to become the world's best law professor and overcome the Kagan effect. And so what happens if you do? Well, maybe you'll become like Elena Kagan and eventually become a law clerk to Thurgood Marshall, University of Chicago law professor, Harvard Law School dean, White House counsel, Solicitor General, and now U.S. Supreme Court Justice. But based on my experience, won't make you any taller. Thank you.